I've heard that there were at least five dead, and the number of wounded goes up over 70. There's an interesting report out there claiming that the head of the Israeli army was actually at that facility and may have been one of the casualties. There's no confirmation of that. But when you hit a dining facility, people think they're safe, and this is Hezbollah sending them a very clear message that Hezbollah is not defeated. Hezbollah is not going away. And it wasn't just the deaths at that facility. There was also Hezbollah had set up an ambush at the tunnel entrance. A couple of Israeli soldiers were killed trying to enter there. There were another couple of Israeli soldiers killed down in Gaza. So from that standpoint, as those death tolls mount, that's significant. Because think back during our time during the invasions in Iraq and then Afghanistan. Afghanistan came first, but then our 2003 invasion in Iraq, we were getting maybe 2 to 3 killed every 2 or 3 days, and man, Americans were horrified. That was really nothing, but it carried a political cost, and I think that's exactly what's going to start fueling more opposition to Bibi Netanyahu and his policies. Because it's not just the ones who are getting killed. It's those 70 plus who were wounded. Some of them are going to be suffering life-changing, life-altering wounds. Losing a limb, losing an eye, traumatic brain injury. So this starts to spread throughout the society that they'll start asking themselves, is this worth the price?
Larry Johnson's remarks provide a sobering perspective on the recent escalation in Israel. What began as an isolated drone attack has spiraled into a broader series of deadly ambushes, claiming lives and leaving scores wounded. Hezbollah's message is unmistakable. They are neither defeated nor retreating. These attacks go beyond military losses. When Israeli soldiers are killed in their own dining facilities, it sends a psychological shockwave. Soldiers expect to face danger on the battlefield, but being targeted in what should be a safe environment changes the dynamic. Johnson's insight reveals that Hezbollah is exploiting this vulnerability to undermine Israeli morale, and the strategic implications are far-reaching. As the number of Israeli casualties rises, so does the political pressure. Johnson draws a parallel to the U.S. experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan, where even modest casualty figures carried significant political weight. In Israel, the public is beginning to ask, at what cost? With over 70 wounded in this latest incident, many of whom will likely suffer life-altering injuries, the human toll of the conflict is becoming harder to ignore. Prime Minister Netanyahu, already facing political challenges, may soon encounter even more opposition. As casualties mount, public sentiment could shift, challenging the government's ability to justify ongoing military operations. The ripple effects of each soldier's death or injury are not limited to the battlefield. They extend into Israeli homes, sparking questions about the value of the conflict. Johnson's comparison to the U.S. experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan is crucial for understanding the gravity of the situation. During the early 2000s, American casualties in those conflicts were relatively low by the standards of large-scale wars. However, the deaths of just 2 or 3 soldiers every few days still had a profound political impact in the U.S. The American public grew increasingly disillusioned with the wars, demanding accountability and reconsideration of military strategy. Similarly, in Israel, as more soldiers are killed or wounded, public patience may wear thin. While the Israeli government continues to emphasize the importance of defeating Hezbollah and securing the country's borders, the rising human cost may make it harder for Netanyahu to maintain public support. As in the U.S., political costs are often tied directly to the human cost of war. The consequences of these attacks will not be limited to the battlefield. The 70-plus wounded soldiers represent more than just military statistics. They are individuals with families, friends, and communities. Many of them will be returning home with injuries that will change their lives forever. Lost limbs, traumatic brain injuries, and other debilitating conditions. These injuries will have a lasting impact on Israeli society as families grapple with the emotional and financial burdens of caring for wounded soldiers. As Johnson notes, these injuries also affect public opinion. When soldiers return home with visible, life-altering wounds, it becomes much harder for the public to ignore the realities of war. The cost is no longer abstract, it's personal. And when a society begins to question whether the sacrifices being made are worth it, leaders must take notice. Prime Minister Netanyahu now finds himself in a precarious position. On one hand, he must project strength, reassuring the Israeli public that the military can effectively counter Hezbollah's threats. On the other hand, he faces growing dissent as more soldiers are killed or wounded. Each new casualty raises the political stakes, as Johnson highlights, and Netanyahu's ability to maintain control of the narrative is slipping. Hezbollah, meanwhile, is playing a strategic game. By targeting not just soldiers but the perception of safety and security within Israel, Hezbollah aims to weaken Israeli resolve. Each successful ambush or drone strike is not just a military victory, it's a psychological blow. And with every Israeli soldier killed or wounded, Hezbollah's message becomes louder. They will not be defeated, and they are willing to fight for the long haul. In the end, Johnson's insights point to a larger shift in the narrative surrounding this conflict. For years, Israel has portrayed itself as a dominant military power in the region, capable of neutralizing any threat. But as Hezbollah's attacks demonstrate, Israel is facing a more resilient and adaptive adversary than previously thought. The losses Israel is now enduring are not just tactical setbacks, they are political vulnerabilities. Hezbollah's strategy of wearing down Israeli forces through a series of calculated attacks is beginning to have its intended effect, both on the battlefield and in the court of public opinion. The longer this conflict drags on, the more challenging it will be for Netanyahu to justify the continued bloodshed. As this conflict unfolds, one thing is clear. The cost of war is never just counted in lives lost or territory gained. It's also counted in political stability, public support, and the morale of a nation. Johnson's analysis highlights the delicate balance that Israel must now navigate, maintaining military strength while addressing the growing opposition from within. With Hezbollah's attacks continuing and the death toll rising, Israel's leaders will be forced to reckon with a harsh reality. The question now is not just whether Israel can win this war, but whether it can sustain the costs, both human and political, of fighting it. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, and remember to always question the narrative. According to Larry Johnson, I've heard that there were at least 5 dead and the number of wounded goes up over 70. There's an interesting report out there claiming that the head of the Israeli army was actually at that facility and may have been one of the casualties. There's no confirmation of that. When you hit a dining facility, people think they're safe. This is Hezbollah sending them a very clear message. Hezbollah is not defeated. Hezbollah is not going away. And it wasn't just the deaths at that facility. Hezbollah had set up an ambush at a tunnel entrance, killing a couple of Israeli soldiers. A few more were killed in Gaza. As those death tolls mount, that's significant. Think back to our time in Iraq and Afghanistan. Losing 2 to 3 soldiers every few days horrified Americans, and it carried a political cost. I think that's exactly what's going to start fueling more opposition to Netanyahu and his policies. Thanks for watching.